Little Richard is a cultural icon, but what do we really know about him? And what have we forgotten? He was born in Macon, Georgia, to a conservative small-town family. His father was both a minister and a nightclub owner. Gotta love that combination. Yeah. He blessed us with the sex anthem, Tutti Frutti, and Little Richard had an incredible gift, no question about it. But still, there's so much more to discover. A new documentary titled Little Richard, I Am Everything, from director Lisa Cortés, honors the late forefather of rock and roll with a deep dive into his life and hardships, interweaving his very queer upbringing with his open struggle with his homosexuality. He was undeniably a star even when people and the industry underestimated him, stole from him, or refused to recognize the trailblazer that he was. Little Richard's story isn't just the story of an inventor of rock and roll, but a queer black man growing up in the South who, at a time, was hated for his sexuality.
The film explodes the whitewash history of rock and roll and shines a light on the originator, the emancipator, the one that started it all, Richard Wayne Penniman. When I started researching Richard to make this film, it seemed like his life was so full of contradictions. He was gay, he was straight, he was a preacher, he was a drug addict. But then, what's wrong with contradictions? I believe that's where the magic comes from. And that's where the title came from, I Am Everything. Little Richard careened like a shiny black pinball between God, sex, and rock and roll. And it was his wild and all-encompassing spirit that gave us the freedom to be who we are today. When I think of Little Richard's place in music history, the label that resonates the most for me was architect.
Question number 4, with a Bacardi shot. I'd swallow that. Black History Month includes the queerness of Little Richard. Absolutely. So we all do include it.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. What do we think? Little Richard, he's over the top, super feminine, black, in a time period where all of those things were impossible.
Can you imagine what he went through? I can't even begin. First of all, Lisa Cortés, she's amazing. So this documentary is going to be incredible. I can't wait to see it. But what he went through, I mean, he was performing back when black performers weren't allowed to perform in certain places. You know, white performers would have to come up and go to bat for him to be able to perform. He would have to stay in different hotels. Like he did not get to be his homosexual self, you know, with a lover like Lil Nas X is, you know, like just bringing his boyfriends everywhere he is. That didn't exist for him. You know, he was one of 11 siblings, I think, you know, and his family wasn't on board for many, many, many years until some money started coming in. And then, you know, then different conversations were had, you know, but what he lived through, I mean, he deserves a bigger spotlight than he's gotten, especially from our community.
And why doesn't he get it? You from my seat, over the course of, let's say, the last 20 years, I never hear reference of Little Richard. I never do. Now, that's not a question of his talent or his impact. It's a question of why doesn't our community voice up for him, speak up for him the way we think.
So I think just in general, you know, there's been several documentaries and several movies, you know, done about Little Richard. If you think about the movie about that Leon starred in, amazing. And then if you think about the Speakeasy, how he had to still play and raise money. And so the family, yeah, right, the father was so against him being flamboyant. He fried his hair, he laid his hair down. But people still recognize his talent. And so they allowed to utilize his gift to, if you don't speak about it, we're going to support you. And so that's how he rose through the Chitlin Circuit. So people, the black folk,
Chitlin Circuit?
The Chitlin Circuit.
I've never heard that phrase. What does that mean?
So the Chitlin Circuit
I know what chitlins are.
Aren't they good?
They're delicious. I grew up in the South.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
The Chitlin Circuit was the place where only black performers could perform throughout the South. And it was primarily built around like speakeasies and those kind of places where black folks could go and not deal with segregation. And to Faye's point, when he performed with the white artists, he had to leave and maybe travel 30, 40 miles away to stay at a black-only space. So the Chitlin Circuit is where he made his money. And so that's where he did his bones. He earned his stripes, for lack of a better word. And so people respect him because of that. And he put himself in white spaces. You know, think about all the award shows that he had to be the only black and still be flamboyant, still be his authentic self. Think about all the people he inspired, the Princes, the David Bowies, and still do that. And so I agree with you that I think because we're now finally opening up to realize the gay queer gifts that people have and have had in history, only when we can continue to have those conversations can we give him what is due to him. Because people recognize him for his resilience and his perseverance, that part, but not for the queer part, because he tried to fit in.
Right.
He married a woman, you know, he tried to live the straight life. Then he went to drugs, because imagine when you have a gift that you try to suppress.
Yeah.
What happens?
I want to ask about the flamboyance of Little Richard. If Little Richard, let's set the singing aside for a moment. The personality of a 30-something at the time, let's say, black LGBT, as flamboyant as Little Richard was, would he be embraced in black community today, black church today? Black advocacy circles today, would it be accepted?
In the church world?
That's just one of the black.
Not in the church world, but he would be, I mean, in my opinion, but in the queer world, of course. Like, I have a fascination with people like Little Richard, even Walter Mercado, like people who were known to everybody that was queer. Like the first time, I mean, when I knew about homophobia and all the stuff and Smear the Queer in school and all that stuff, I remember watching Little Richard and watching Walter Mercado, and none of the adults in the room were batting an eye and saying,
no, and they were allowed into all the living rooms.
Right. And that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, there's something like I want to see this documentary badly, because there are certain people that have whatever combination it takes to say, like, I'm putting it out there who I am, and
pass.
you are going to accept me, and you're going to love me, and they get that pass. I'm not discounting any of the discrimination, all that stuff that he goes through, but there's some amazing quality about him that back in the 70s, like,
I agree. I agree with you, and it's Juan de Mercado, by the way, and it's Juan de, and I have, there's this thing, because I've watched all of these artists as a kid, and my family, you know, not to say that they were extremely homophobic, but they were definitely a little bit masculine and toxic and Latino.
Yeah, the macho stuff.
But when these people came to the television, they celebrated them, and it's almost like, why do they get a free pass, but then us here on the streets get beat up for it?
Why?
And it's
What's
almost,
the answer
it's
to
almost,
your question?
It's almost as if like they supersede because they make money, they're talented, they're on TV, so they're just eccentric. And people who are that successful are always going to be eccentric.
And so I think he would be, because most musicians, typically the stereotype is most musicians in black churches are gay. And so I think he would be more welcome. And then also the side point is, also I want to recognize too, as you mentioned about Nas X, more and more performers are now coming out, love me as my authentic self and let my talent speak for myself. Yeah. We have performers, gospel performers with sex tapes out there, and still surviving.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, it's we've got to move on, but it's interesting to me. This is a documentary that catches my attention of wanting to see. One story that I can tell from the age of me at this table. Everybody, you may or may not have heard of Merv Griffin. Once upon a time, Whitney Houston's launch was Merv Griffin. And he was the most successful daytime real entertainment talk show. He was Johnny Carson in the day. And I remember, it might have been in the 70s, that Little Richard went on Merv Griffin. And when he came out to walk up to Merv Griffin put out his hand to shake his hand. I vividly remember this. And Little Richard twirled, very flamboyant. I didn't completely understand what was going on. Said something and snapped his finger. And Merv Griffin laughed hilariously. And I thought, I didn't really understand what was going on until later, that Merv Griffin was gay. And he got instantaneously his laughter of how flamboyant Little Richard was, but couldn't do anything. I'm going to shake your hand because I'm Merv Griffin.
Imagine if he was like, yes,
television.
Right.
Right, that's exactly right.
That's modern day, right.
What it was on Little Richard. Watch the documentary. It's likely going to be fascinating. LGBTQ plus news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Laura are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out television network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now to ensure the growth of the entire LGBTQ plus community.